Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 361, A Measured Response. Security at the Clifton estate was on high alert. Guards patrolled the exterior of the home diligently. In Jessup's living room, Jessup, Debbie, Alex, and Rufus gathered together to discuss the attack on the Clifton's business building. Alex started suddenly. "I almost forgot. Mr. Clifton, please send someone to the high building opposite the office. I left the sniper tied up there at the top of the building. He was injured, but not too badly. Please have them bring him here." He had been so busy running around making sure everyone was okay that he had nearly forgotten about the sniper completely. He still had many questions he wanted to ask him. Rufus made the call immediately. 10 minutes later, they heard back from the staff at the Clifton's building. No one was on the roof. All that was left was a small pool of blood. "He's gone?" Alex thought for a moment. "Someone must have rescued him. That means he wasn't working alone. We're not out of trouble yet. They're still lurking around here somewhere." This new development didn't worry him too much. Even if the sniper had been rescued, Alex was confident he would be able to track him down again. Rufus paced anxiously. "Are we just gonna sit here and wait for them to attack us again? We can't even hide. What can we do to defend ourselves? Even if you beat every attacker, it's going to have an impact on our reputation. People won't want to do business with us." Debbie turned to her grandfather with a worried expression. "You'll stay inside, won't you? I'm so worried about you." She hadn't known him long, but she felt incredibly protective of Jessup. But Jessup smiled at her calmly. "These things come and go. What will be, will be." "Yes, but that's hard for me to accept," said Alex. His eyes were also filled with worry. He wasn't scared for himself, but he was anxious for his family and friends. "We have to do something," said Rufus. "We'll track down the Stedmans and fight fire with fire. We can send a killer of our own if we have to." He didn't see any problem with using the Stedmans' dirty tricks right back at them. Jessup shook his head. "Calm down, Rufus. Don't forget, we don't have any solid evidence that Art Stedman was behind this attack. Personally, I don't think he has the courage for something like this. Besides, if we attack the Stedmans, aren't we also attacking the entire Blood Brothers gang?" Jessup continued. "Will we attempt to kill them all? We're not that strong. In this case, they have more power than us. They would eat us alive." Rufus found this hard to accept. No matter how many fighters the Blood Brothers gang had, surely they would be defeated over time with persistent efforts. "Fine, let's just bury our heads in the sand then," he said bitterly. "What was that?" Jessup demanded. "What did you say?" He slammed his fist down on the table, knocking over his drink and spilling liquid everywhere. Rufus glared back at him sullenly. Jessup was shocked that Rufus had spoken back to him. Rufus hardly ever contradicted him. "I don't like this," Rufus continued in a low voice. "It's weak. I think you've changed." Jessup gave him a fierce look. "Oh, really? And what do you think I should be doing?" "Order an attack on Art. Let him take the punishment he deserves. He's tried to hurt us in so many ways. All the attacks on our family. Have you forgotten how many people were injured at the dinner? Some of them will be dealing with the consequences of that attack for the rest of their lives." Rufus's eyes filled with tears as he remembered the sight of his son bleeding on the floor. Jessup shook his head. "If this is the path you've chosen for yourself, I can't help you. I wash my hands of it." Jessup understood Rufus's pain, but he couldn't support him if he was going to make decisions based on emotions rather than rationality. It would only hurt the Clifton family in the long run. Endurance was their best tool. People had always coveted the Clifton family's power and tried to take it from them. This was part of the territory. Rufus fell silent, overcome with his emotions. Alex glanced at the older men nervously. He hadn't wanted to interrupt, but now that Rufus seemed to have said his piece, he decided it was time to speak up. "I don't think it's right to focus on just the Stedmans. They're not the real power behind the scenes. They just want to hurt us." "Sir," he turned to Jessup, "I think you should spread the word that you've been injured and stay inside for the time being. That way I know you're safe. If I have less people to guard, I can focus on going after our attackers." He turned to Debbie. "I'd like it if you stayed here too. Spend time with your family, your grandfather, and don't go outside too much." Jessup nodded gruffly. "It's a sensible plan. I agree." Rufus lifted his chin. "What about me?" "I don't think the attacks will stop anytime soon," said Alex. "Help spread the word about the attack on Jessup, and let's see what we learn from people's reactions." Rufus nodded. "All right." Alex caught Debbie giving him a worried look and smiled at her. "Don't worry about me. I won't be taken down that easily." They sat and talked through their plans for the next few days. The phone rang, and Rufus stood to answer it. After a while, he returned to the rest of their little group with the receiver in his hand. His eyes were filled with hatred. "It's Chris," he whispered. Jessup sneered. "Tell him I'm seriously injured. Tell him I'm on the brink of death." "Right." Rufus lifted the phone to his ear. "Chris Stedman, you've called it a bad time. My father was hurt today and is resting. He can't speak with you. You've got some nerve calling us like this." His voice was filled with anger. But Chris didn't match his tone. "I'm so sorry to hear he's not doing well. I'd like to visit, if that's all right. If there's anything me or my family can do to help yours in this difficult time, please do tell me." He sounded offensively sincere and magnanimous. Rufus felt rage swelling in his heart, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw Jessup nod. He took a deep breath and said, "That's very kind. You're welcome here any time. Thank you for your kind attention to my father." He managed to sound humble. The anger that shook his voice even sounded a little like fear. On the other end of the call, Chris was pleased and flattered at the deference Rufus was showing him. When he finished the call, Chris looked over at his father with a proud expression. He knew Art had overheard everything. But Art was still in a cantankerous mood, smoking furiously to calm his nerves. He couldn't believe that Jessup had really been hurt that badly. After taking a deep drag of smoke, he said, "Go over there now. I want to know what's happening over there." 20 minutes later, Chris pulled up at the Cliftons' home and walked into the villa. Episode 362, Choices. Rufus was waiting for Chris by the door. "Hello, Chris Stedman," he said coldly. Chris barely noticed his tone. He gave Rufus a big smile. "Please, take me to him. I brought a little gift. I hope that's all right." Rufus looked down at the basket of flowers in Chris's hands. It was the sort of bouquet people typically brought someone who was grievously ill. Anyone who spotted Chris bringing it to the Cliftons would know that it was intended for someone on the brink of death. Rage filled Rufus again. It was just another form of boasting. Chris laughed lightly. "Thank you for your concern." Rufus gritted through his teeth. He turned and led Chris inside their home. As Chris expected, Jessup was not looking well. He began coughing deeply into a towel as Chris entered the room where he was resting. When he pulled the towel away from his mouth, it was bright red with blood. Chris kept a stoic, patient look on his face as he waited for the coughing fit to subside. But in his heart he was celebrating wildly at the sight of the old man's poor health. Finally, Jessup shivered and lay back to rest. Chris stepped forward and said in a concerned tone, "Mr. Clifton, what on earth happened? How did these injuries occur?" Jessup shook his head. He pointed to his throat, indicating he couldn't speak loudly, and murmured something too quiet to hear. He looked frighteningly weak. Chris felt his hopes soaring. It seemed obvious to him that the old man was nearly dead. He was happy that he had decided to make this visit so he could witness Jessup's suffering in person. A doctor stepped into the room and began to check Jessup's vitals. He shook his head as he worked, clearly not thrilled with what he was finding. After a few minutes, he turned to Rufus and commented rather ominously that they should start making preparations. "What do you mean?" Rufus snapped at him. "Is that all you have to say?" The doctor was frightened and began to backpedal immediately. "It will take time, I suppose. Much too early to say anything either way. Please, forget what I said. Excuse me." He left the room meekly. Chris watched this exchange with a sneer. It was clear that this was the end of the Clifton family's years of power over Baltimore. The sight of Jessup's weakness brought out Chris's cruelest instincts. He began thinking ahead to all the ways the Stedmans would undermine the Cliftons once Jessup was out of the picture. It would be easy to take Baltimore out from under them. There was a general feeling of unease throughout the house. None of the Cliftons wanted to fight with the Stedmans for territory. They felt instinctively that the fight would not go in their favor. Finally, Chris said, "Thank you so much for seeing me. But it's clear you need rest, Mr. Clifton. I'll return to my family and update them on the situation." Chris was more relaxed and happier than he had been in weeks. He could see the bright future of his family clearly in his mind. Off to one side, Rufus had disposed of the flowers Chris had brought with a cold look. Chris reached up and scratched his ear, where a highly advanced little communication device was tucked discreetly out of sight. It allowed Art to listen in on what Chris was doing and hear the conversations in the Clifton house for himself. But now that their spying was finished, Chris turned it off. After saying his goodbyes, Chris strolled out to his car. But before he could get inside and drive away, he found himself surrounded by a number of the Clifton security forces. He took a defensive step back, raising one hand to his ear to turn his communication device back on. He didn't understand what was going on. It seemed ridiculous that the Cliftons would try to kidnap him in broad daylight, yet it seemed clear that they weren't going to let him leave. Suddenly, the guards rushed at him. One grabbed the communication device at his ear and ripped it out, throwing it to the ground and smashing it to pieces. Chris began to yell out in alarm. "What are you doing? Get away from me!" Suddenly, the guards all stopped. Behind him, Chris could hear the sound of someone applauding slowly. It was Rufus. He walked forward calmly, all traces of grief and humility gone. "By all means, please keep shouting," he said to Chris. "But who do you think can hear you?" "What do you want with me?" Chris demanded. Rufus shrugged. "You sound so offended. But how many people in this world do you think you're responsible for hurting and killing?" As he drew closer, Chris realized his eyes were filled with intense hatred. Rufus's words shook him. Chris knew that he had caused a great deal of harm. When Rufus glared at him, he felt as if every person he had ever hurt was glaring at him too. Chris had never felt real guilt before, but now he felt fear. "My son was hurt," Rufus continued quietly. He pulled on a pair of gloves and drew a knife from his jacket. It was an old piece from the Black Orchid cult that had been passed down to the Clifton family. Even if they were no longer members of the group, they still respected their history with the cult. Rufus threw the knife down on the ground between them. "Of course we have hurt people too," said Rufus. "But we never harmed innocents. We only ever targeted the wicked. We made those choices consciously. You don't seem to think about anyone other than yourself. But still, I'll offer you a choice. You can choose to suffer, or you can end things for yourself quickly. Which will it be?" Chris's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He couldn't believe his past was catching up to him like this. "Listen," he said quickly, "pain isn't the only thing I can give you. What about information? I could help you. I could make my whole family help you. The Stedmans will be loyal to the Cliftons. Doesn't that sound good?" He felt his knees going weak and knelt to the ground before he fell. "We didn't hurt Mr. Clifton. It was the Blood Brothers who attacked him. And they only attacked him because they were trying to get to Alex. I'll tell you everything you could possibly want to know about them." Chris could sense the power of Rufus's fury. He hoped his offer would appease him somewhat. But Rufus stared down at him coldly. He didn't seem interested in anything Chris had said. "I told you to choose," he said quietly. "Have you made your choice?" Episode 363, An Ironic End. Chris was completely unnerved by Rufus's cold demeanor. He began to seriously fear for his life. "You need to be careful," he cried, his voice rising in pitch. "If you take this too far, my father will get revenge. I'm the son and the heir of the Stedman family. You can't threaten me like this without consequences." He switched from begging for mercy to threatening the entire Clifton family. "Your family's nothing without Jessup. You don't have his power. As soon as Jessup is gone, your whole family's finished. I'm willing to be merciful in the future if you apologize." Finally, Rufus's expression changed. He smiled. With a shake of his head, he looked up to the sky. He didn't say anything to Chris. Chris glared up at him. Are you kidding me? Don't ignore me. If you apologize now, you can save the rest of your family. Rufus looked down at him with a smirk. I gave you 2 choices. I'll add a third. Pick up that knife and fight me. If you win, I'll let you go. All his anger at Chris had dissipated while he listened to the younger man beg and scream. He saw now that it was pointless to take the man so seriously. He was pathetic. I'll count to 3. You need to choose. If you don't make the choice for yourself, then I'll just kill you and throw your body to the wilderness myself. Chris felt his blood run cold. Rufus no longer seemed human. He felt sweat streaming down his face, and he struggled to think straight as Rufus began to count. Hey, slow down, he cried angrily. Who could just pick like this on the count of 3? Stop it. I'll choose. I'll fight you. Rufus clapped his hands. Great. Then stand up and let's begin. He turned to the guards surrounding them. No one is to interfere. Whatever happens, let him go and we're finished. No one is to stop him. Do you understand? The guards all murmured their assent and turned their backs on the fight, forming a ring around the pair. The yard where they faced each other was very calm and quiet. It was a spot Rufus often brought his son to play. Thinking of his son's injuries brought up his anger all over again, and he became lost in his thoughts. Tears welled up in his eyes as he thought of his son's suffering. He left his back open to Chris without even realizing it. Quietly, Chris picked the knife up from the ground and threw himself at Rufus, slashing at his back. Yet it was almost as if Rufus had been expecting this surprise attack. He stepped away on instinct, dodging the blow. The force with which Chris had thrown himself forward carried him through the air, his arms spinning wildly as he tried to regain his balance. But it was too late. He fell heavily, piercing himself with the very knife he had tried to cut Rufus with. His suffering passed quickly. After a few minutes of struggling for breath, he slumped back to the ground with a sigh. Rufus stared down at him in surprise. He couldn't believe Chris had finished himself off with his own failed attack. It was not the outcome he had expected at all. He had no choice but to report the outcome to Jessup, who had shaken off his act and was now pacing the halls with energy. Alex stood nearby, listening and thinking hard. Jessup frowned as he walked. He didn't want to punish Rufus for challenging Chris. He understood how much pain and fury his son was struggling with, and it was too late now to change the course of events. All they could do now was deal with the reaction of the Stedmans when they found out. I'll take responsibility, Rufus said quietly. I'll take care of everything. You can rest. Jessup gave him a stern look. Do you think you can handle it? I don't think you understand how far Art Stedman will go to get revenge for this. Although Chris hurt many people, we did not need to be his executioner. He killed himself, Rufus said bluntly. He was killed by his own attack. It wasn't how I wanted it to happen, believe me. Even though the incident had shaken him, he was starting to find some humor in the irony of Chris's death. You think Art will believe his son drove himself to our house to kill himself here? Don't be a fool. I'll deal with this, Jessup said coldly. He turned to Alex, who had overheard much of the conversation, and said, "What do you think? How do we solve this?" Alex frowned. As he said, even if we try to say it was suicide, it still happened at the Clifton house. The truth about what's been going on between the Cliftons and the Stedmans will come to light. They attacked us with the Blood Brothers gang. We have to find a way to divide those two powers so they'll be less of a threat. Rufus and Jessup were both stunned. "How?" Rufus asked. Alex said, "Send a competent person to put Chris in his car and drive him to another location. Leave him there. Art Stedman has plenty of surveillance resources. He's sure to find his son's body soon. But let him think that Chris died after he left the house." Rufus nodded quickly and began to make the arrangements. The man they selected quickly loaded Chris's body into his car and drove it away. As he drove, Chris's cell phone began to ring. The man did not bother to answer it. He drove the car far along the road and out to a reservoir. He pulled over onto the side of the road and repositioned Chris so he was sitting in the driver's seat. Then the man started the engine again, placed a heavy bottle from the trunk of the car on the gas, and let the car roll into the reservoir, taking Chris with it. The car was soon completely submerged. The man still standing on the road changed his clothes. When he was finished, he looked up to the sky. "Rest in peace, Saul," he said to the air. Then he turned and disappeared into the wilderness. Art Stedman had tried to call his son several times, and he was becoming uneasy. But it did not occur to him for a second that Chris was in any real danger, let alone that he might have died. Art was still riding the heavy feeling of their victory against the Cliftons. With Jessup injured and presumably near death, Art could use the Blood Brothers gang to get rid of anyone else who tried to stand in his family's way. Alex was at the top of his list. Episode 364, Strong Senses. At noon, Alex and Rufus rushed to another one of the Clifton family's office locations. They planned to hold a press conference there. As they arrived, Alex spotted a blue car pulling away. As it passed by, a strange feeling came over him. He felt a rushing in his ears that suddenly cleared away, leaving him with a sudden, sure feeling about the car. "Stop!" he cried. He turned quickly to watch the car go by, and realized he recognized the person sitting in the driver's seat. He jumped out of Rufus's car and took after the blue car as it raced down the road, waving his arms wildly. In the car, 4 women sat comfortably. They had just bought the car and were eager to meet up with their master. It was Callisto, Luna, Celeste, and Celine. Celeste was driving. But suddenly, something came up by their side and tugged one of the doors open. They were so strong that they actually damaged the door, scraping and denting it in the process. Celeste barely glanced in the rearview mirror to see who their attacker was. She just pressed on the gas and sped up more. The car sped up, as if trying to shake him off, but Alex was determined. He used his internal force to increase his speed. To bystanders, it looked as though a blur was chasing the car. Finally, Celeste looked in her mirror and realized who was chasing them. She slammed on the brakes, and Alex had to move quickly to avoid running headlong into the car. Mr. Alex, she yelled through the window. If you wanted us to stop, why didn't you just call? You don't have to attack the car. The other girls piped up too. They were all very excited about their new car. Don't you like the car? Luna asked. It's so beautiful. Or it was, anyway. Celine added, We came out here to surprise you. Callisto frowned. It's too bad about the door. The girls chatted away obliviously. They had only just bought the car, and all agreed that it was too bad it had started to take damage so quickly. But Alex knew there was no time to listen. His instincts were screaming at him. He ripped the doors open and pulled them out of the car one by one. He pushed them in the direction of the Clifton's building, a safe distance from the car. As they ran, he shouted after them, Run! That's an order! Don't stop! Celeste was the last one to get out of the car. Alex scooped her up in his arms and ran. People who passed by this scene on the road were stunned at the sight of the beautiful girls running away from the car. Celeste blushed and wrapped her arms around Alex's neck, tucking her face into his chest with a shy smile. It always startled her when Alex did something like this, so caring and protective. She scolded herself a little for letting herself indulge in romantic fantasies. She knew he was dedicated to Debbie, but she also felt it was only fair she be allowed to enjoy moments like this. Her train of thought was cut off abruptly as Alex wrapped her tightly in his arms and crouched to the ground, protecting her with his body. Duck! He shouted to the others. Everybody get down! Everyone around him fell to the ground just in time as the blue car exploded. Hot air swept over all of them, singeing many people's hair. But luckily, no one was seriously injured. Silence fell over the street. Everyone was shocked and unsure of what to do. Alex got up from the ground and looked back. The car was a smoking wreck. The Moon Girls all clapped their hands over their mouths, horrified. They couldn't believe they had been sitting in that same car just a minute or two before, completely oblivious to the danger they had been in. Although each had been trained in combat, they were still very young, and did not often consider themselves to be in any real peril. Now their thoughts were filled with horrible thoughts of what might have happened had they been caught in the explosion. They gathered around Alex silently, deeply rattled. Celeste asked him, How did you know? How did you know we were in danger? Alex frowned deeply. He shook his head, looking at each Moon Maiden, as if to make doubly sure they had not been injured. He couldn't believe what a near miss that had been. Their thoughts were very similar. Each were grateful that their first instinct after buying the car had been to find Alex as quickly as possible. I'll buy you a new car, he promised them with a smile. Another blue one if you like. Maybe with stronger doors. I thought I damaged that door a little too easily. One by one, the girls began to laugh. They felt like the luckiest people alive. But they still wanted to know how Alex had detected the bomb. Luna wondered aloud if he had smelled a chemical and how they could have missed it. Celeste shook her head. They had passed each other so quickly. It seemed impossible that he had had any time to notice anything. I heard it, Alex said faintly. I heard it ticking. The girls stared at him in wide-eyed amazement. They hadn't heard a thing. That seems strange, Callisto said with a frown. Bombs don't make noise. A timed bomb would, and did, Alex added. The adrenaline rush was fading from his body, and he was starting to feel tired. He tried to keep his voice level and even. The last thing he wanted to do was argue after such a horrible near-death experience. Episode 365, Invasive Questioning. The Moon Maidens all looked at each other in surprise. If Alex said that he had heard the bomb in the car, then of course they believed him. But it seemed incredible that he had managed to hear something as quiet as the ticking of a time bomb over the roar of the engine of the car. They also didn't understand why they had been targeted for this attack. Celine tilted her head. When do you think it happened? Was it just installed? Alex frowned. Whoever did it, I suspect they've been targeting you for a long time. They may have been looking for an opportunity to attack, and today was the day they chose to take action. Luna shivered. Someone's been following us? We didn't even notice. How awful. What can we do? After such a near miss, Luna began to have paranoid thoughts. She wondered if they would check every car and building they entered from then on. Don't be afraid, said Alex. We'll just be extra careful for now. But why did you come here at all? How did you know I would be here? Debbie called us and asked us to protect you, said Celeste. She was worried. Alex smiled. I see. All right. Well, stick with me for today. I'll send you back to the Cliftons' house later on. But secretly, he was amazed at how much information the Blood Brothers seemed to have gathered about himself and the people close to him. He felt keeping the Moon Maidens at the Clifton residence would be the right thing to do. That way he could keep everyone safe and out of the limelight for a while. Even if the Blood Brothers chose to attack the house, at least he would be able to make some extra preparations to keep everyone safe in one location, rather than having them all spread out across the city. A sharp clicking sound went off behind him, startling him out of his thoughts. He looked around wildly, trying to find the source. When he turned, he saw a group of photographers taking a series of photos. Other reporters standing with them were holding microphones and cameras, recording everything. Celeste stepped in front of Alex, blocking his body from their view with hers. What are you all doing? Leave us alone! It wouldn't be good for Alex's face to appear in the news. The Moon Maidens were also not keen to have their image spread around. She wondered at how quickly the reporters had arrived at the scene. No one listened to her warning. Some of the reporters were wandering around the abandoned, damaged car, even poking it daringly, as if to see if it would blow up again. Some turned to their cameras and reported directly on what they observed. But many of them kept glancing shyly at Alex, as if waiting to see what he would do next. Leave us alone! Celeste shouted again. But yelling, unfortunately, seemed to draw more attention her way. One reporter walked right up to her with her microphone. Hello, young lady. Can you tell us more about what happened here? Another joined in. Why did the explosion happen? Was there a problem with the car? Do we need to issue a warning to other people who own this kind of vehicle? Ma'am, if something is wrong with the car, then we need to let other consumers know. We deal in consumer reports. Please, tell us what happened. Celeste quickly became nervous and angry. She didn't like the way the reporters spoke to her and jabbed their microphones in her face. The idea of complete strangers watching filmed clips of her speaking the next day made her want to hide. Part of her was tempted to grab the nearest camera and smash it to make all of them give her space. But she knew this would not be a smart move. She also had no idea what would happen if she refused to give a statement. What if she somehow made it worse by refusing to comment? What if people started making up crazy rumors and caused even more trouble for them? Some of the reporters, seeing that Celeste was reluctant to speak, turned to Alex instead. "Hello, sir," said one female reporter. "What happened here? Was this a fault of the car or a premeditated attack? Should we contact the manufacturer?" Alex gave her a cold smile but refused to comment. The sight of Alex being targeted made Celeste find her courage. "No comment," she said. "Leave us alone." "How can you have no comment? It's your car," the reporter snapped, turning her attention back to Celeste. She was happy to pick a fight with whoever was willing to speak with her. Celeste couldn't bear it anymore. "Go away!" she yelled. "It's none of your business, and we don't want to talk." Another camera was being pushed toward her. The lens was angled to get a picture of her and Alex together, the photographer contorting himself in an awkward angle to get the shot. The sight infuriated her even more. As if sensing her distress, Alex suddenly stuck out his hand and blocked the lens. He pushed the camera and its photographer back, making the man stumble. Everyone froze. Then, suddenly the clicking and snapping of pictures being taken started up again. The noise was so thick it was like rainfall. It was unacceptable for a member of the press to be attacked. As far as the media folks standing around them were concerned, pushing a photographer away was a grievous assault. "Sir, you just hit a member of the press. What were you thinking?" "Would you like to apologize? This looks very bad for you." Alex shook his head. "You all need to just give us some space." The scene kept getting worse and worse. He had too much to worry about without the press adding to it. "Sir, we're just doing our jobs. There's no need to be violent with us." "Are you typically a violent person? Is this normal for you? I'm sure our viewers are curious." The questions became sillier and sillier as the crowd's fury and indignation grew. Alex looked out at the crowd, trying to control his anger.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.